Nephi's ship is one of the most inspiring accounts in all of Scripture. It is also the key to finding the place Bountiful. Before Nephi reached Bountiful, he probably knew nothing about shipbuilding or sailing. Critics have questioned, how could Nephi have acquired all the tangible and intellectual resources he needed to build a ship and to sail it to the New World? For example, they cite that trees large enough to build an ocean-going vessel have never grown in southern Arabia. These criticisms would be valid in all of southern Arabia, except for one very unique place, the ancient port of Korori in Oman. In Nephi's day, the port at Korori must have been a wonderful sight, with ships coming from the Red Sea, India, and Africa to trade for incense. In December 2000, the United Nations designated Korori as a World Heritage Site, noting that it was one of the most important trading activities in the ancient world. Korori is quiet today, but at Nephi's time it was an important harbor that certainly he and his father would have known about. To understand the mystery of just how old the harbor is at Korori, brought us here to Luxor in Egypt, 2,000 miles from Oman. We're here at the temple of Queen Hatshepsut, who reigned all of Egypt almost a millennium before Nephi built his ship. Murals in her mortuary temple tell of how she sent large ships into the Arabian Sea to trade for the frankincense. Archaeologists are uncertain as to where her ships actually traded for the incense. However, according to the Omani Ministry of Information, there is an inscription in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt that shows an Egyptian ship harbored at Korori. The ministry further claims that it was from Korori that Queen Sheba sent a ship of frankincense to King Solomon. Inscriptions that predate Nephi have been found near Korori. They tell of how the people there cultivated rice, a plant native to India. The body of evidence suggests that ships from Korori were trading with Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and other empires well before Nephi's arrival. Discovering this ancient harbor and its maritime lore leaves little doubt that it was the place where Nephi built his ship. While still in the valley of Lemuel, the Lord instructed Nephi that he would be crossing the many waters to reach the promised land. Then, only a teenager, Nephi knew that one day he would need to build a ship to reach the promised land. Looking upon the vast waters of the Indian Ocean, Nephi must have realized the awesome challenge before him. His ship would need to be large enough to carry 40 to 50 people, perhaps even 70, and all their provisions to the New World. It would need to be strong enough to endure the storms and high seas of two great oceans. There was probably no ship afloat at that time that could reach the Americas with such a large party. Historian Nigel Groom believes that the ships that sailed from the Red Sea to southern Arabia in that era were similar to the ships of Tarshish. He notes of these ships the rough weather of the monsoons, forcing crews to spend large periods in harbor, waiting favorable conditions. Ships clung to the coast, traveling only when they could see. Nor did these ships carry provisions and water for extended periods at sea. End quote. However, by Nephi's time, Arab sailors had learned how to make long, open water crossings from Arabia to India and across to Africa in their famous sewn ships. It is safe to assume that when Nephi cried unto the Lord on the mountain, that he was asking for the Lord's help in designing a ship capable of making a voyage to the promised land. We can read the Lord's immediate response, "Thou shalt construct a ship after the manner which I shall show thee, that I may carry thy people across these waters." It wasn't until the 15th century A.D. that ships like the Portuguese man-of-war were capable of regular voyages around Africa. Undoubtedly, Nephi's ship was not as sophisticated as the Portuguese ships. However, Nephi's ship would have needed to incorporate some of the same basic technologies. Such leaps in shipbuilding design needed the help of the Lord, and thus from time to time we see that the Lord inspired Nephi on how to build his ship. Even so, Nephi would have needed skilled shipwrights to construct the ship. He also needed large, strong, and durable materials. To gain an appreciation for Nephi's ship, we traveled to Tacoma, Washington, to the bridge of the USS Cape Intrepid to visit with Frank Linehan, an officer in the U.S. Navy, a graduate of the California Maritime Institute, and an expert sailor.
Good morning, this is Frank Linehan of the Maritime Administration. My background is chief engineer. I work for the Maritime Administration in managing these ships. I've been in the marine business for 33 years. I've sailed 11 years. I have intimate knowledge of ship construction and operation. I've been asked by George and Tim to give a short dissertation on vessel construction and design and operation in respect to the time of Nephi. In a discussion of the construction of Nephi's vessel, we have a feeling, an intuitive feeling through years of experience and being in the industry that the vessel would have had at least been 80 to 100 feet in length, and the beam, the width of the vessel, would have had to been almost, 30 feet, maybe even 35 feet, taking the beam or the width out a little wider than normal due to launching it in probably a shallow bay. So she would have drawn probably 8 to 10 feet in that range. Maybe it could have been even as deep as 12 feet. A one-masted vessel would have been too tall and not so well balanced in heavier weather. At that particular time, the vessel would have been constructed quite heavy aft with a finer entry forward. That I'm quite sure. She would have to have been constructed on ways so that she could be launched prior to outfitting. That is, stepping the mast, rigging, ground tackle, etc. Nephi would have had to have access to deep water and still water, preferably pier side, in order to fit out the vessel that he was constructing. This rules out a launch from the beach, that I'm quite sure. The vessel would have been too big, too unwieldy to launch in the surf, and there would have been no way you could pull it out and stabilize it. The rig of the vessel, to elaborate a little bit on the split rig, would have been a twin-masted layout, whereas the forward mast, it could have been higher than the aft mast. The aft mast could have been higher than the forward mast, that being a schooner rig, the other being a ketch rig, or that both masts could have been the same height. But even split rig with an 80 to 100 foot boat, you're talking a rig as high as 50, 60 feet high. So then you're talking a couple tremendous sails built in the fabric of that age, which would be kind of like a canvas, probably a cotton of some type. And when that rig would be wet with its lines and the canvas, that sail would be more than 1,500 pounds in fabrics of this day and age. So that would require quite a bit of manpower to even raise that sail. So I mean, you're talking a lot of physical dexterity, plus you don't have the winches that we have this day and age. You've been pulling that up with Norwegian stream, as we call it. That would be labor. The vessel would have had a deck over it, so that means her bulwarks, as we call it, which would be the sides, would be quite high off the water. The higher, the better it would be at sea. It'd be drier. It would handle better in heavier weather. The construction of that deck would have required a little more sophisticated knowledge maybe than at the time that was being built around there, through either importing that talent, or in other words, that deck would have to fit tight. So it would require caulking that deck, it would require mortising that deck in order to make it tight down below where they carried all their tools, their lines, their extra canvas to repair their sails, their food, their water, their ballast to keep the ship upright, which probably would have been rock in the bottom, animals to sustain them in their voyage, their personal belongings, their sleeping quarters, which most likely would have been down below deck. Also, they would have had to eat below deck in heavy weather or rain. The vessel probably would have been a little higher back aft in the stern. That way they could see forward when they're piloting the vessel, from the standpoint of handling the rudder. Even if the rudder was probably a tiller type, where they probably handled the tiller on that size with maybe with a block and tackle, or tackle just around what we call a kingpin or something like that, where they could get a purchase on it. A purchase being, in other words, every time it takes a turn around that pin, you reduce the amount of effort it would take to pull that tiller and shift that rudder from right to left, or port to starboard as we call it, and you'd be able to secure that tiller for long periods of time, tie it off, and maintain your course.
At first, Frank Linehan's assessment of a ship 80 to 120 feet in length seemed excessive. However, the more we learned of Nephi's voyage, the more we came to appreciate Mr. Linehan's expertise. Consider for a moment the length of the voyage of over halfway around the world, crossing 2 oceans.
Captain Har Morton wrote, "In the Pacific especially, it is necessary to plan well. An accurate estimate of time was, and still is, important for provisions and equipment for the voyage. Almost any Pacific voyage was a long one." In 1980, maritime archaeologist Tim Severn built an 80-foot replica of a medieval Omani ship and sailed her to China. He wrote, quote, "With a crew of 22 hard-working, hungry men, there was not enough room to store all the provisions for the journey. I calculated that we would carry a basic store of rations and supplement our supplies with purchases we made at countries along the route. We had boxes of nuts and dried fruit, hundreds of eggs preserved in grease and wrapped in sawdust, sacks of onions, dried peas, rice, and packets of spices. For variety, there was a selection of tinned foods and sauces." End quote. Severance took a ton of dates. His crew caught fish where they could. The ship carried a month and a half supply of water, 1,100 gallons in all. They used half seawater and half sweet water for cooking, and, of course, bathed in salt water. Severin's 80-foot ship had a crew of only one-third the size of Nephi's party, and traveled only about one-third the distance. Still, there was not enough room to carry all the food and water they needed. I boarded another 80-foot Arab sailing ship and noticed the lack of room in the hull. An ancient ship needed to carry its own spare parts, extra sails, and tools. There were no shipyards in which to find supplies. They had to carry with them extra large pieces of wood, leather straps, canvas for sails, extra rope, large quantities of defouling, coating, and tools for each type of repair. Severin's replica ship needed major repairs after less than 1,000 miles at sea. Nephi's ship traveled some 14,000 miles and would have needed repairs en route. Severin's needed 3 sets of sails to reach China. It's safe to assume that Nephi's ship carried extra sails to replace the ones that wore out. Ancient Omani ships also carried several large stone anchors, up to 8 feet in length. Severin's ship carried 4 ancient anchors and 1 modern anchor. By the time Severin's reached India, he had to recoat the hull of his ship with anti-fouling compound. One unexposed piece of wood he left in the water as an experiment. It was so worm-eaten that one could stick their finger through it like a wafer. Nephi's party took tents with them to the New World. There were at least 10 married couples in the party. Assume that each family had one small 10 by 10 foot traditional goatskin tent. If so, the ship carried roughly a ton of tent that when folded required a space 6 feet by 6 feet by 12 feet long. Nephi's ship was very large for its day. Her hull alone must have weighed between 150 and 200 tons. Before Severin built his replica ship, he was already an experienced transoceanic sailor and shipbuilder. He wrote of being nearly overwhelmed with the difficulties of building an ancient Omani ship. He wrote that his ship required a place to build her, a place to outfit her, and a large crew to sail her. Maritime experts tell us that besides a divine design, Nephi needed 7 key maritime resources. If he lacked any one of these, he could not have reached the New World. Nephi's ship probably took up to 2 years to build. Each spring, the southern Arabia shoreline is hit by strong storms from the west, and then in the fall by similar monsoons from the east. During the monsoons, the surf crashes inland well beyond the wide beaches of southern Oman. To build a large ship in Oman, one needs a protected inlet. Severin built his replica ship in northern Oman. He needed to bring in 300 tons of earth to make a suitable building site in a harbor, some 3 meters above high tide mark.
Looking aft, on the bridge wing of the Cape Intrepid, 150 feet above the water, basically 200 feet aft, we're looking into the commencement bay of Tacoma. We're looking at the serenity and the calmness of a winter morning. As you can see, even ships this big, this is the type of water that a seaman looks for to put the vessels in, to do cargo handling, to fit them out, to construct them, to take aboard consumables and expendables, change crew.
There is only one natural harbor in southern Oman that could have protected Nephi's ship during both the spring and fall monsoons. It is Khor Rori. Bluffs and hills surround the entire harbor, making it an ideal place for Nephi to construct a ship. A seagoing vessel needs a specific set of materials. Despite the incredible odds against it, the historical evidence now suggests that the materials necessary to build a great ship were all available at Khor Rori in Nephi's time. Consider just what this means. Severin's ship, much smaller than Nephi's, needed long, straight hardwoods to make the structural components of his ship. Some Book of Mormon scholars have suggested that the trees in the green hills of southern Oman were the ones Nephi used to make his ship. This is misleading. The local trees are short and gnarly. The largest variety is a sycamore fig, a softwood too weak for shipbuilding.
We're standing on the bridge of the Cape Intrepid here, and we're looking forward. We're looking forward to the bow, basically 500 feet, where it's been my personal experience to see waves breaking over that bow, which is 50 feet off the water.
The backbone of Severin's ship, the keel, required a solid hardwood beam 12 inches by 15 inches by 52 feet long. The main spar to hold the sail was 81 feet long, and its mast required a 65-foot log. Marine archaeologists agree that no trees have ever grown in Oman that could have provided the large timbers necessary for ocean-going vessels. For this reason, ancient shipbuilders of Oman imported teak and mango wood from India. We have found only one possible source of large hardwoods in Oman that could possibly have been used for shipbuilding. These trees seem to grow in only one place in Oman, the upper valley to Khor Rori, Wadi Darbat, the place that the locals call the Valley of the Big Trees. Most likely, Nephi traded his no longer needed herd of camels for imported pre-cut wood from India. India is known to have exported timbers since 2050 BC. Khor Rori was the export harbor for the prized frankincense, which in antiquity was worth more than its weight in gold. Certainly, the Indian traders exchanged shipbuilding timbers there for the coveted frankincense. Nephi's texts suggest that he used pre-cut timbers, which were cut in a foreign land. He wrote, "We did work timbers of curious workmanship." If Nephi logged his own trees, how could they have been of a curious workmanship to him? Different types of sails are needed for different types of wind conditions. A large sail is needed for light winds, but will tear itself apart or capsize the ship in strong winds. Sails also wear out, stretch, and tear. One of Severin's sails measured 3,000 square feet. Nephi needed to fabricate or purchase cotton or coconut canvas for sails. He also needed someone to show him how to design the different sails he needed. In the marketplace at Khor Rori, Nephi would have found Indian or Egyptian cotton canvas. If Nephi's party made their own canvas from coconut fibers or cotton, it probably took them longer to make the sails than it did to build the rest of the ship. Korori is located on the Salalah coastal plain, the only place along the southern Arabian coast where coconuts grow, a natural fiber capable of being made into sail canvas. The Omani shipwrights did not nail their ships together. They sewed the planks to the ribs using rope. Severn's vessel was sewn together using 400 miles of coconut husk rope. It required 50,000 coconuts. Korori was the only place in southern Oman where Nephi could have found imported or domestic rope. Severn's sewn ship was leaking so bad by the time it reached China that his crew was pumping out a foot of water every 24 hours.
Even though Nephi's ship was exceedingly fine in workmanship, that we're reasonably sure. I doubt if it was only tied together with coconut ropes. Such ships were known to leak and fall apart in heavy seas. Nephi had iron available to him at that time, and the Chinese were at that time using nails, wooden pegs, and mortise joints to strengthen their ships. To me, it seems almost imperative that they had other techniques to strengthen the hull.
Only 6 miles from Korori, a team from BYU discovered a deposit of ore from which Nephi could have made tools and nails. Because of its tremendous weight, a wooden ship is not completed before launching. When the hull is finished, the ship is lowered into the water using gravity on what are called ways. Once moored in the harbor, the mast, spars, riggings, ballast, anchors, and sails are added. The hull of Severn's replica ship weighed over 100 tons before it was lowered into the water. Once in the water, 15 tons of ballast were added to the hull to keep the ship upright in the water. To finish a ship, shipbuilders moor the hull to an embankment or pier. Linehan shares his thoughts on simply trying to load an ancient anchor aboard a ship without moorings.
Just a thought on the anchor. In other words, anchor on an 80 to 100 foot vessel. You would like it to be darn near 500 pounds to hold the thing in any kind of weather that you had to secure the vessel. So that requires a lot of physical effort to load that anchor. Just from the standpoint, if you tried to load that thing in an open roadstead, which we'll call a beach with surf breaking on it, it would almost be impossible. I mean, how would you row something like that out and then put it aboard the vessel? You need to put that aboard in quiet waters. Not to mention the amount of manpower it would take to pull that thing up without a binnacle, which is what we call the particular winch. They've called it even from ancient times, where even in older times where you would have several men and they would walk around that winch and pull that anchor up. Back in that particular time, you wouldn't have the sophistication to do something like that. So practically all hands, or that's what we call the people or the crew that's on that vessel, would have to turn to pull that anchor out of probably maybe fairly deep water to get that thing up on board and then secure it or stow it for sea.
The Book of Mormon provides clues that Nephi had his ship moored before he embarked in it into the open sea. First, we read in 1 Nephi 18:4 that Nephi's family determined that it was a good ship before they embarked. How could they have judged she was a good ship before seeing if it leaked, rested properly in the water, or handled well in various types of sea? Second, Nephi wrote 4 times that they went down into the ship before they set out to sea. The most logical explanation is that the boat was already in the water and moored at a harbor where they could go down into the ship. The natural harbor at Korori has several places where ships could be moored. In ancient times, the Arabs called Korori Merbat, the Arabic word meaning the moorings. Shipbuilding requires long years of study and practice to master. When the Lord commanded Nephi to build a ship, Nephi did not ask what tools he needed for the job, only where to find the ore to fabricate them. This would imply that Nephi already knew what tools he needed for the job by having observed shipbuilders at Bountiful. Nephi was familiar enough with the work of other shipbuilders that he could compare his ship to vessels being built, quote, after the order of man, end quote. We believe that one of the most important reasons the Lord led Nephi to Korori is that it had a long tradition of shipbuilding. Here, Nephi could have learned how to build a ship or consult with a master shipbuilder. Book of Mormon scholar John L. Swanson wrote, "At least some of the technology Nephi used on his ship differed from that used by contemporary shipbuilders." His statement to this effect implies that he was sufficiently familiar with what others did that he could clearly distinguish his technique from theirs. Omani shipwrights build ships without the aids of plans or drawings, by eye and experience alone. Although each craftsman appears to go about his work with a sort of instinct for accuracy, construction is carried out under the careful eye of the master shipbuilder, the Ustad, whose authority is founded upon long years of experience in the trade. The shipbuilders are usually the sons of shipbuilders and have been taught by their elder relatives. As far back as 2050 BC, Omani shipwrights are mentioned in the text from the Sumerian city of Lagos. The shipbuilders at Korori were possibly the best shipbuilders in the world in Nephi's day. According to the Omani Ministry of National Heritage and Culture, shipbuilding at Taka, near Korori, goes back to great antiquity, with the building of what is called the Dofari Sambuk, the famous sewn boats. Sewn sambuks are always beautiful and exactly made, perhaps more so than any other Omani vessel. Rock art found in the caves near Korori depicts ships. These drawings are estimated to date to roughly the first millennium BC. The drawings show boats that are different from those being built in northern Oman, indicating that Dhofar, the area where Korori is located, had its own indigenous shipbuilding at the time of Nephi's arrival. The shipbuilding tradition of Oman provides for us for the first time an understanding of how a young man from Jerusalem, a city with no maritime lore whatsoever, could build a great sailing ship. Nephi needed a way to get his ship safely from the calm waters of the harbor into the Indian Ocean. As a new captain, Nephi needed a safe channel to get his vessel beyond the dangerous surf that is common to southern Arabia. Korori's rock prominences project some 200 yards beyond the beach and the breaking surf. They form a nearly perfect passage into the Indian Ocean. It takes years of training at sea before one could captain a large sailing vessel. When Nephi's brothers discovered that he was building a ship, they called Nephi a fool. Quote, "He also thinketh he can cross these great waters." End quote. It is clear to anyone who has ever sailed that Nephi had to master dozens of seamanship skills before he left port. Without a mentor, how could Nephi learn the basic sailing techniques of sailing close to the wind, wearing around, and tacking? Maritime historian Mauricio Tosi writes of the early Arabian seafarers. For the first navigators, it was like venturing into outer space, and only a body of accumulated experience, strengthened by tradition, would have ensured survival at sea.
From my personal experiences at sea, even aboard vessels much bigger than Nephi and his group were planning their trip aboard, I've been in the North Atlantic in a storm on a container ship as a second officer when I was younger, where we went backwards for 3 days, and the first 4 rows of containers on the vessel were completely wiped free off the deck of the ship, and we had Volkswagen parts scattered down the length of the vessel. The waves were hitting my cabin, which was more than 55 feet off the water. What I'm trying to build a point of here, or emphasize, is that the vessel needs to be constructed soundly, stout. It has to be a seagoing design, and this is no area for somebody to be learning how to sail. My experiences of sailing across the Pacific to Hawaii, down the coast of Central America, down the Pacific, and in the Caribbean, would run across heavy weather and just 65-foot boats, and it's a religious experience. Particularly, I can't imagine doing it without any skill or background. It's just not possible. Even with the inspiration and the help of the Lord, you still need the skill and vessel handling and the seamanship required to make a safe transit.
Korori was probably the only place in the ancient world where Nephi could learn to sail the open seas from experienced captains who had time to share their knowledge with the young Nephi. The Omani captains were among the first sailors to abandon the shoreline by setting off across open seas to India and Africa. They learned to navigate long distances across open seas by using the sun and stars. Nephi needed to learn the secrets of using the monsoon winds in order to sail the Indian Ocean. Only in the spring would the winds carry ships to India, and in the fall in the opposite direction. The Greeks and Romans did not learn the secret until around 56 AD. To wait for the monsoon winds to change direction, captains would bring their ships into the protected harbor at Korori and wait out the winter. The Greeks called Korori Mosca. Their nautical instruction book, dating between 50 and 200 AD, provided the following instructions for captains sailing in the Indian Ocean. The place goes by the name Mosca. Spend the winter there due to the lateness of season. Certainly, the Greeks adopted this practice from the Omani captains who sailed these waters before them. What better place for Nephi to find someone to teach him how to sail than where the southern Arabian captains moored for the winter? Nephi's ship was large. It needed many willing and trained men to sail her. The largest Omani wooden sailing ships needed 25 to 40 sailors aboard them.
Manning an ancient ship took many skilled hands. Nephi's ship had no sophisticated block and tackle or pulleys. The spar and sails weighed tons, particularly when wet. Seamen work as crews, teams of men who have been trained to execute as a group difficult and dangerous procedures, especially during storms and heavy weather. Nephi could not have left port without a trained crew that would have included every adult in the family with some form of formal teaching and experience before going to sea on a trans-Pacific voyage.
Nephi needed safe waters to train his crew. The harbor at Korori was ideal for this purpose. We measured the width of the bay at over 1/4 of a mile across and 1.5 miles long. Plenty of room to practice sailing in small boats. Moored at Korori, Nephi could have taken his ship on several shakedown and training voyages before setting out for the land of promise. Such tests would have allowed Nephi to test various combinations of sail shapes and sizes, riggings, ballast placement, and sailing techniques in his new ship. The apparently uneventful first days at sea testify that Nephi had his ship seaworthy and his crew properly trained before embarking for the promised land. The prophet Joseph Smith was a farmer, not a seaman. Only in the last few years have historians and maritime archaeologists discovered the glorious history of the port of Korori. Yet the Book of Mormon describes with surprising detail an ancient journey down the frankincense trail that ended at Korori. Here a young prophet was commanded by the Lord to build a great sailing ship. The challenge must have seemed overwhelming to a young man who grew up in a culture that had no maritime lore. However, the more we learn about the history of Korori, the greater our understanding of why the Lord led Nephi to this harbor, and the more we appreciate the words of Nephi. I will go and do the things which the Lord hath commanded, for I know that the Lord giveth no commandments unto the children of men, save he shall prepare a way for them, that they may accomplish the thing which he commandeth them. Discover more about the Book of Mormon through science and exploration by subscribing to this channel. You can also visit our website, christinperu.com, and review our books which contain the documentation of our research. You can also find on the website information about our annual Book of Mormon tours to Peru.